Good evening. Welcome to the lecture series named in honor of Betty Intagliata, who is here this evening. Betty. And funded through the generosity of Bill Jervey, who's here this evening. And I have a short commercial announcement.
Now, I did not do any arm twisting, but I'm going to twist yours. Within the next 2 years, we're celebrating our centennial. And I can't think of a better time that if you haven't joined us, please do for these 2 years, just for 2 years. And not just pay us some bucks, get involved. It is our centennial, once in our lifetime, for Venice. And that's my commercial. We love to have these members.
Well, I'm planning on being here for the next one as well. So. And the rest of the commercial is, we are a all-volunteer organization. We need volunteers to keep this going. We need docents to help out at the train station, the depot, with the circus car. We need people to help out greeting guests at the front of the house. So please, if you've got an interest, some time, please share that time with us. Now, you're not here to listen to me, I know. You're here to listen to Bertha Palmer, portrayed by Sue Chapman. Sue portrays Bertha Honoré Palmer as she would have appeared at the opening of the Chicago's World Fair exhibition in 1893. This is Bertha's claim to fame. Now, she happened to be the richest woman in Chicago, the wife of Potter Palmer, the owner of the Palmer House Hotel, if you've ever been there, and most of the real estate in all of Chicago. So she was the reigning queen, as you might imagine, of Chicago society. In first person, Sue Chapman will take you along with Mrs. Palmer from birth to death, telling you of all aspects of this woman's exciting and influential life, with a special emphasis on her Sarasota connection. Sue is a 40-year Venice resident with strong ties to the community. She made this up. I mean, since her father, Harry Case, was a former mayor of Venice. Some of you may remember him. Coming from Ohio, where she received her BA degree from Baldwin Wallace College, she was a high school English teacher, which you'll see evidence of, and later went into retail management. She's now retired, and she is a 3-time plus past president of the Historical Society. I mean, she's got ribbons all the way up here, stripes on the sleeve. I mean, it's amazing. She has also served as our archivist and historian, and currently is a member of our Speakers Bureau. She's been portraying Mrs. Palmer since 2010 and brings Mabel Ringling to life as well. Not tonight. You'll have to come back for that. She lives in one of the original Venice homes, built in 1926. So history is part of her everyday life, and she loves being Bertha and dressing like Bertha. So please welcome Mrs. Bertha Honoré Palmer.
Good evening. We could do a photo op later. me to introduce myself. I am Bertha Honore Palmer. I appear to you tonight as I looked at the opening of the 1893 Chicago Exposition. Now, I was born in Louisville, Kentucky on May 22nd, 1849. My father, Henry Hamilton Honore, was of French descent, and he was a real estate developer in Louisville. And he moved our family north to Chicago when I was just 6 years old. My mother, Liza, made sure that I was well educated. And at the age of 18, I graduated in 1867 from the Convent of the Visitation in Georgetown, near Washington, D.C. Now, I was a skilled musician. I could play the piano, the harp. I was a vocalist. I was a proficient linguist, a brilliant writer, a skilled politician, and a fine administrator. Some of these last skills being learned from my father, later my husband. Now, I first met my husband-to-be when I was only 13 years old. Potter Palmer fell in love with me then, admiring my large dark eyes, my heavy wavy hair, and my magnetic smile. Waiting patiently for me to reach my 21st birthday, we were married on July 29th, 1870. Now, Potter was 23 years older than I was, but age made no difference to us. We were a well-matched couple, strong-willed, armed with economic power and social position, enabling us both to carry out our personal visions. Let me tell you a little about my dear husband. Potter was born in 1826 in upstate New York, near a small town called Durham. In fact, they called his neighborhood Potter Hollow. He was a farmer of a farming family with a Quaker background. But farming was not to be for Potter. He didn't like it. He decided he would open a local dry goods store and become a merchant. He tried to make enough money to allow him to travel west to the growing city of Chicago. And he arrived there in 1852, and he built and opened a very large department store, a dry goods, they called it then. Now, he built that business up to be the largest mercantile business in the Midwest. He was so successful because he allowed almost anything to be returned. And he extended a very generous credit policy, making him one of the first merchants to give the little lady what she wants. Now, one of his innovations were bargain days. What do you call them today? Sales. In addition, he stocked just about everything you can imagine under one roof. In essence, the first modern department store. He taught the clerks to remember the patrons' names, not to be too pushy, and make sure that they went out with a smile. His store was the one place in Chicago that women could go to unescorted and never worry a bit. Now, he sold his business later to Levi Lederer and another fellow by the name of Marshall Field. He wanted to move on to more real estate development, and he wisely, though, retained the ownership of the building, quietly buying up more than a mile of property on State Street. Now, he built the Palmer House Hotel, 8 stories tall, with 225 rooms decorated with Italian marble, French chandeliers. It was a wedding gift for me. It opened on September 26th, and 1871, and only to be swept away 2 weeks later in the Great Chicago Fire on October 10th. Now, it was only open 2 weeks, but Potter was not to be set back by this tragedy. He said, "We'll build another one." And he did. And he backed it with a guarantee, as he had in his dry goods store, claiming the building to be totally fireproof. In advertisements, he dared anyone to light a room on fire. And he said, if at the expiration of 1 hour, the fire does not spread beyond the room, the person accepting this invitation is to pay for all damages done and for the use of the room. He went on to develop State Street as the city's new business district. Now, we lived in the second Palmer House in the 1870s, where my first son, Honore, was born in 1874, soon to be followed by the birth of my second son, Potter Jr., 1875. But I needed a place to live that would give me a place to entertain suitable to my position as a leader of the Chicago Society. So we began the construction of our home, often called the Castle. It was a mansion on North Lakeshore Drive. You can see it over here. And it was suitable for what we were going to need. The construction started in 1883, but it took 2 more years to finish the building, and that had nothing to do with finishing the inside. The estimated cost of $90,000, a lot of money in those days, ran to over budget, to about $1 million. Now, our home was based on a German castle. It featured a 3-story Italian central hall under a glass dome. Other rooms were furnished in a variety of styles. There was a Louis XVI salon, a library, an Indian room, an Ottoman room, a Renaissance room, a Spanish music room, and an English dining room. The rugs were perfumed so that they smelled nice. We had a spiral staircase that went up the tower, and of course there were also 2 elevators. You didn't expect me to climb 4 stories tall. The house was the largest private residence of its day, and the bills were also large. And so Potter finally told the architect, "Don't tell me anymore, just pay them." Now, if you came to call on me, you might notice that there were no doorknobs on any of the doors or locks. So it was strange as you first looked at it. But I valued my privacy, and you were required to present your calling card. Even my best friends had to write for an appointment. So it worked for me. I loved to entertain, but I liked my privacy too. I was noted to be an art collector, and I was recognized on that scene as being on the cutting edge of new art, Impressionism. So we added to the mansion a 90-foot-long ballroom and a picture gallery to the house in 1893 to hold my ever-growing art collection. It was hung all on the walls, one below the other, on red flocked wallpaper. Now, we had many guests that we entertained in that ballroom. President Grant, President McKinley, and President Garfield, as well as the Prince of Wales, later to become King Edward VII. I used to say, keep up with the procession is my motto, and head it if you can. I do head it, and I feel that's where I belong. Now, I socialized with a wide variety of creme de la creme, royalty, captains of industry, other social leaders. I even had access to the White House, since my sister Ida married the oldest son of President Grant. My niece Julia, who was born there, I treated as my daughter. And President McKinley appointed me to the only female to go to the National Commission of the Paris Exposition in 1900. I was the third woman to be awarded the French Legion of Honor. Now, in preparation for the World's Columbian Exhibit of 1893, to be held in Chicago, which was to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the first voyage of Christopher Columbus to the New World, I was elected to be the chairman of the board of lady managers. Now, this board would oversee the design and activities of the massive women's building. You can see it over here. It had ancillary buildings, such as the children's building, a daycare center where women could leave the children for the day, and a woman's dormitory where you could rent a room for 40 cents a night. Now, it was my influence that prevailed to hire a woman architect to design the building. Even though Sophia Hayden had brought the project in on time, under budget, I felt that a few more things could have been added. And so I started to add a few things in. You know, I never could understand why that young woman had a nervous breakdown and never designed another building. Now, I was one of the first officials at the fair to ride the giant Ferris wheel and to see all the things at the exposition. Cash register, zippers, all new inventions, giant locomotives. One of the things I least enjoyed at the fair, however, was Little Egypt, sometimes called a hoochie coochie dancer. I found her quite common. Now, I must tell you, too, of my problems with the Infanta of Spain. Now, since she was picked as an appropriate person to come and open the exposition, being, you know, Isabella funded Columbus, you understand. So she came. I was prepared to welcome Her Royal Highness with lavish entertainment and deluxe accommodations at the Palmer House. And when I invited her to dine at my castle on the lake, she turned on her heel and said, "I don't dine with the innkeeper's wife." Oh, yes. You can imagine, the evening was a total disaster. Now, I prided myself on holding my temper when faced with such rudeness. But probably the most interesting part of the story is that later on, we became fairly close friends. Now, after the close of the exposition, I continued on with my busy life. I was not only a socialite, but I was a great champion of the working woman. I strongly believed in equal pay for equal work. I worked tirelessly for just causes, and I was a supporter of Jane Addams at Hull House. I headed many a crusade for social reform and temperance. I was an early member of the Chicago Women's Club. We met to discuss social problems and develop some solutions. Eventually, we got the city to provide free milk and kindergarten in education for underprivileged children, and many other causes too for the needy. Our membership was a mix of working girls and society women, like myself, and I became a patron of the Women's Trade Union League and helped the millinery workers in Chicago organize and improve their working conditions. Now, I was not a suffragette, but I certainly believed in the strength of women. Now, my husband was very generous to me. He was forever bringing me some bauble. Nothing was too good for his sissy. That was his nickname for me. And I was particularly fond of pearls and diamonds, as you can see. And one of my treasures was a collar comprised of 2,269 pearls, 7 diamonds, and a huge pink pearl pendant, valued at $200,000. Now, in his will, Potter stipulated that I should inherit his entire estate. It was around $8 million then. When his lawyer suggested he might want to reconsider that, saying that I might marry again, Potter replied, "If she does, he'll need the money." I understand that my biography that was later written about me was entitled Silhouette in Diamonds. How appropriate. Now, we spent time in Newport and made many trips to the continent where we socialized, and I continued to add to my art collection. Eventually, I had 29 Monets and 11 Renoirs, with other lesser-known artists too. Potter's health, never the best, was declining, and in the late spring of 1902, he was down with a bad case of the grip. We had no idea, his 2 sons and I, as we were by his bedside, that in less than 3 hours, he would be dead. Both the boys and I were there. He was 76 years old. Now, even though I was still in mourning, I did go to England for my son Honore's wedding in 1903. Now, that was the year I contracted typhoid fever. And I didn't return home, but wintered in Paris. I convalesced. It was difficult for me because my health was always good, and my father was so supportive, and I disliked being ill, but I persevered. News came to me that while I was there of the Iroquois Theater fire in late December of 1903, where 602 people were killed. I could not help but think of the great fire that had swept away the Palmer House that dear Potter built for my wedding gift. But life moved on. I kept my mourning clothes. They went from black to lavender and gray, and I finally emerged all the way from mourning. There was always talk and gossip that I might marry again. I always had an escort when I went out anywhere. Everybody was saying, oh, it might be a royal, it might be someone, it might be someone. But I never remarried. I think it was because I was content with my family and confident as a woman who could survive alone. Now, it was a wintry day in Chicago in 1910 when I came across an ad in the Chicago Tribune. Let me read it to you. Grapefruit and orange groves, beautiful winter homes, fruits and vegetable lands in famous Sarasota Bay District. I am one of the largest growers and can furnish you with any kind or size of property desired. I also improve lands and raise groves for purchasers. Best location in the U.S., lowest prices, and easy terms. Call or write for a free book and full information. J.H. Lord, owner. Well, the mere mention of warm sunshine and fruit growing on trees was enough to catch anyone's attention while trying to keep warm in the midst of a howling Chicago blizzard. So I asked my father if he would contact this gentleman, Mr. Lord, and find out what was going on. I was very intrigued by the ad. I found out later that he had specifically placed it in the paper for me. Now, Papa always indulged me, and he soon brought Mr. Lord over to meet us, and we made arrangements for me to travel south, where his business partner, Arthur B. Edwards, would act as my guide. We arrived February 10th, traveling in my private railroad car. I was accompanied by my father, my two sons, and my brother, Adrienne. Now, Mr. Edwards and I hit it off right away. He was not exactly the same social status as me, but we had lots of fun riding around in that buggy of his, looking at property. He told me tales of the southern people, and we saw flora, fauna, all kinds of stuff. And one day, he took my father and I on a little boat ride down along the bay, and he showed us a nice piece of property on Little Sarasota Bay, and I asked him if it was for sale. And it was an area called Osprey. I asked Mr. Edwards, what was the deal? And he said, well, I think it's for sale. But the man who owns it doesn't really need the money, so he has set the price quite high, $11,000. So I agreed. The price was too high and went home. And then I went directly to the owner, paid his price, and saved myself the real estate commission. I named it the Oaks, and that property, along with 200 more acres, would become my winter home for the rest of my life. Now, my home that I built there had 31 rooms and 5 porches. We had to accommodate our winter guests, so there were 12 bedrooms and 9 baths, and a 40 by 30 foot living room, and a dining room, and a huge hotel-style kitchen. We had our own electrical plant and a water system. I brought many of my Impressionist paintings to hang on the walls to spruce it up. And I also had about 16 sets of china, many of them in shades of blue, which were my favorite color. After all, it was just a simple vacation house. Now, eventually, Mr. Lord and Mr. Edwards would sell me much more property, and in the end, I believe the amount I owned was around 140,000 acres. Now, Mr. Lord and I even went into business together, forming a land development company called the Sarasota Venice Company. My sons and Mr. Lord would act as vice president and manager of development and sales. Now, one very large problem of the day was transportation. There wasn't any. We came down on a rail line as far as Sarasota. That was the end of the line. There were no cars, although there's a few cars in my day, but no roads to speak of. So you had to travel along the shore by boat. And I thought it would be wise, if I was going to pursue this, that I encouraged the railroad to build a spur from Sarasota to Venice. I had plans for Venice. It was going to be a gorgeous city by the sea and a resort center. So, when the railroad balked, I said perhaps I should cancel my plans to purchase 50,000 acres north of Venice. Ooh, all it took was a strong resolve and perhaps a little manipulation. Now, I was interested in many other projects apart from land development and sales. My very first profits came from my 1,300 acres of citrus groves. Hundreds of workers picked that luscious grapefruit and sent loaded sunshine north to the snow country. The groves were also home to many of my beehives, where we produced orange blossom honey. Now, I also purchased an area of wildland north of Tampa, known as River Hills Ranch, and it would later become known as Temple Terrace, and that's how we got the Temple Orange. It was named after that area. Now, this area later became a suburb of the city of Tampa. I built a model farm and offered 10 to 40 acre parcels of land that could be developed like mine. My name was on the list for anyone wishing to receive samples of new plants from the Department of Agriculture. I was always interested in experimenting, and I raised watermelons and celery. Unfortunately, Bee Ridge was tapering off, so I needed a new venture. I turned east toward the Mayaca River, which I felt was one of the most beautiful spots in Florida. I purchased 6,000 acres with 3,000 head of cattle right from the buggy where I sat with Mr. Edwards. This was to become my favorite project. It was known as Meadow Sweet Pastures. Here I would overcome the difficulties of raising stock, teaching the locals how to dip cattle to protect them from debilitating ticks, and then later bringing in Brahma bulls who were crossbred with our scrawny Florida cattle. History proved me right, as cattle dipping would become mandatory by 1932 as part of the statewide cattle dipping program. And by 1940, they were declared tick-free in Florida. I made some enemies along the way with my new ideas. I also began to fence my ranch. Didn't go over well. I was trying to protect my stock, and so I didn't believe in the old open ranch theory of raising cattle. So the locals were not too keen on that. But I guess the final straw came when I, a woman, sold and shipped the first trainload of cattle to Texas. Now, closer to Venice, I had built a enclave, I guess you would call it, called Eagle Point. It was to be a hunting and fishing lodge for my northern friends. And we had cottages for them to stay in. And there was such sport available. There were hundreds of acres of wild land for hunting, quail, turkey, wild boar, and any other kind of game you could imagine. And the camp was situated on deep water, so it was great for that fighting tarpon. I had other plans to develop the Venice area into that resort I told you about. But in 1916, my dear papa died at the age of 93. Now, I had always had the advantage, other than the typhoid, of radiant health. And because my father lived so long, I thought for sure I would too. But the very same year that he died, I discovered I was ill. We were embroiled in a world war of the likes of which we had never seen before. And in view of my illness and things like that, I decided to shelve my plans for Venice. By now, I had increased my inheritance from Potter. Remember, we started with $8 million, and I ended up with more than $20 million. I fought my breast cancer for 2 more years until I could fight no longer. I died May 5th, 1918, at my beloved Oaks in Florida, just a few days shy of age 69. My funeral was held in Chicago, attended by masses of people, both rich and humble. My butler, who had served me for many years, laid a wreath of orchids at the foot of my coffin, and it was surrounded by beautiful roses that had been named for me, the Bertha Honoré Palmer Rose. My final resting place was in the mausoleum in Chicago Cemetery, Graceland, right next to Potter, where I belonged. Now, my brother and my sons carry on my legacy in Florida. Our names live in street names, Lockwood Ridge Road, Honoré Avenue, and many others. Palmer Ranch reminds you of our name, as does the development called the Oaks. My Sweet Meadow Ranch became Myakka River State Park. My art collection of 52 paintings became the crown jewel of the Chicago Art Institute. I bequeathed more than $500,000 to various charitable organizations. My belief in the strength and the talent of women was ahead of its time. My life and my accomplishments are my personal gift and legacy to you all. Thank you. Let me step out of character for just a minute. I'd like to tell you that we started doing Bertha in 2010. Betty remembers, we had 4 Berthas. Betty was the businesswoman. I was the entrepreneur from Chicago. No, I've often heard that asked this, if she and Mabel were perhaps friends. To my knowledge, they never really crossed paths or became acquainted. They might have known each other. But you see, Bertha died in 2018, and she was very interested in southern development of her property. The Ringlings were just coming to Sarasota. They had not yet built Calzone.
Right. They arrived in 1911.
And they were only down 3 months of the year.
That's right.
Bertha would spend the whole winter to do out her. Yes.
Were you instrumental in planning the city for Venice? It was the first urban plan, is that correct?
No,
Olmsted?
John Nolan was hired by Dr.
Okay, no, okay.
So she had probably some plans showing up somewhere, but because she became ill, and with the First World War raging,
Yeah.
she did not develop anything further than ideas and perhaps a few drawings.
What was her relationship with the Albans?
None that I know of.
Really?
Different paths and crossed.
So she was dead by the time he
Yeah,
bought the property from her?
1918, she died.
What happened to the Palmer house?
It's still going.
Do the Palmers still own it?
It's still, no. I think, Mary or somebody.
What happened to the Sarasota mansion?
Oh, it's, gone. Her house down here, gone, demolished. The castle, demolished. So glad we have some pictures.
Historic preservation,
Yeah. We needed more. Bertha would have been in favor of that, and she was very strong-willed, but she was also a wonderful person. She did mix it with all spectrum of people, and for instance, her neighbor next door, the Oaks, the daughter was getting married, the adjoining property. When the train came with the flowers for the wedding, they were all lilies. Now, lilies were suitable for death situations. This poor girl did not want lilies at her wedding. So Bertha had her gardeners out to her rose gardens and all of her flowers, put them bare, and gave them to the Palmers. That's our Bertha. What is this? Oh, an honorarium. I thought this was going to be a pro bono because it's our own group. Took it back. Thank you, Frank.
You may have heard her mention Joseph Ford. That's the Lord in the Lord Heigl House. Everybody thinks Heigl was a lord. Joseph Ford owned that house, and he let Heigl live in there as the manager of the citrus grove. That's Joseph Ford, someone in our town, of the Lord Heigl House. Wanted you to be aware of that. ADM is, of course, famous in all of Sarasota for his real estate work up there. So, this was a magnificent presentation.
Thank you.
I've seen it before. This gets better each time. I'll tell you that. So thank you.
Thank you all. Did you have a raffle or something?
Oh, yes. Book raffle.
I didn't get to buy any tickets.
Your money's no good.
Oh, okay.